You feed a stray outside your door. It doesn't run. It sits. It watches you with eyes that seem almost human. You think you're being kind, but the real answer is far stranger. You didn't just feed an animal. You repeated an experiment that started 30,000 years ago without a single person ever deciding to run it. You call your dog a pet. Your ancestors would not have understood that word. There was no leash. There was no breeder. There was no plan at all. Somewhere on the cold edges of an ice age camp, a handful of wolves made a choice that no wolf had ever made before. They walked toward the fire instead of away from it. That single decision, repeated over thousands of generations, built the animal sleeping at your feet right now. Here is what almost nobody tells you. Humans did not go out and tame wild wolves. That version feels satisfying. It puts you in control. It is also almost certainly wrong. Picture a hunter-gatherer camp 15 to 40,000 years ago. Fires burning, bones tossed aside, scraps of meat left where they fell. Wolves already lived nearby, watching from the tree line, drawn by the smell of food they hadn't worked for. Most kept their distance. Wolves are cautious animals. Fear of humans kept them alive, but not every wolf feels fear the same way. Just like people, wolves vary. Some are bold, some are anxious, some barely notice a strange sound, some panic at anything unfamiliar. In every wild population, a small percentage sits at the calm end of that spectrum, slightly less afraid, slightly more curious, willing to inch a little closer to the flickering light of a human fire. Those wolves got something the fearful ones didn't. Easy calories. Meat scraps without the risk of a hunt, bones without a chase. While terrified wolves stayed hungry in the forest, the bold ones ate well at the edge of camp. And animals that eat well tend to survive longer. And you get more chances to reproduce. Reproduce more and your calm temperament spreads to your pups. This is not guesswork. It has a name. Biologists call it survival of the friendliest, not survival of the fittest in the way you learned it in school. Survival of the ones who could tolerate being near you. Here is where the story gets genuinely strange. Reduced fear of humans wasn't the only thing that changed. It came bundled with a whole cascade of traits nobody selected for on purpose. In the 1950s, a Soviet scientist named Dmitry Belyaev ran one of the most famous experiments in the history of biology. He wasn't studying dogs, he was studying foxes on a fur farm in Siberia. Belyaev picked out the calmest foxes in each generation, the ones that showed the least fear and aggression toward humans, and bred only them together. That's it. That was the entire selection pressure. Just tameness. Within a few generations, something remarkable happened. The foxes didn't just act friendlier. Their bodies started changing too. Floppy ears appeared where none had before. Tails began to curl. Coats turned patchy, with white patches nobody had bred for. Some foxes even developed shorter snouts and rounder faces. Belyaev had selected only for behavior, and physical traits came along for the ride, uninvited. Why would that happen? The leading explanation involves something called neural crest cells. These are cells present very early in an embryo's development that travel through the body and help form a huge range of structures, including parts of the skull, ears, tail, skin pigment, and even the adrenal glands that control fear and stress hormones. Selecting for calmer temperament appears to nudge the development of these cells in a way that softens fear responses and, almost as a side effect, softens physical features too. Floppier ears, curlier tails, patchier coats. The same biological switch that turns down fear seems to turn down the sharp edges of a wild animal's body. Sound familiar? It should. Compare a wolf skull to a dog skull and you'll notice the same pattern Belyaev saw in his foxes: shorter snouts, floppier ears in many breeds, curled tails, patchy coats in colors wolves never display. Dogs may be, in a very real sense, wolves that were bred for one trait, calmness around humans, and inherited an entire package of unrelated changes because of how development itself is wired. This reframes everything you thought you knew about dog domestication. Nobody stood in an Ice Age camp and thought, I would like an animal with floppy ears. Nobody bred for a curly tail. Those features arrived as a side effect of selecting for something far simpler. Which wolves could stomach being near a fire full of humans without their nervous system screaming at them to run? You might be wondering how humans and wolves ended up cooperating at all, rather than one hunting the other to extinction. The evolutionary biologist Raymond Coppinger argued that early domestication wasn't really something humans did to wolves. It was something wolves did to themselves. Coppinger's self-domestication theory suggests that bold, low-fear wolves essentially adopted humans as a food source, and humans simply tolerated their presence because a wolf hanging around camp could also serve as an early warning system. A strange animal approaches at night, and the loitering wolves bark or growl before a person ever notices. That's not a bad trade for either species. Over time, the relationship deepened. Wolves that tolerated humans got table scraps, humans got warning signals, and eventually help. And here's a detail worth sitting with. A dog skeleton found in Bonn-Oberkassel, Germany, dated to around 14,000 years ago, was buried alongside two humans, and the dog showed signs of severe illness that would have left it unable to hunt or forage for itself for weeks. Someone kept that animal alive anyway. Someone fed a sick dog that offered no immediate benefit at all. That is not a working relationship built on pure utility. That is something closer to affection. This wasn't unique to one site or one culture. Researchers have found ancient dog burials, deliberate and careful, across multiple regions and time periods, treated with a level of ceremony usually reserved for members of the human community itself. So what changed inside a wolf to make this possible? Modern researchers have spent decades trying to answer that question with dogs living today. The cognitive scientist Brian Hare ran a now famous series of experiments comparing dogs to wolves and even to chimpanzees. In his studies, a researcher would hide food under one of two cups, then point at the correct cup. Chimpanzees, despite their impressive intelligence, largely ignored the pointing gesture. Wolves raised by humans mostly ignored it too. Dogs, including puppies with almost no training, followed the point immediately and reliably. That result stunned researchers. Dogs weren't just tamer than wolves. They had developed a genuinely different kind of social intelligence, one specifically tuned to reading human cues. Not general intelligence, not superior problem solving. A very specific skill, understanding what a human is trying to communicate through a gesture. Hare's work suggests this ability emerged as a direct byproduct of domestication itself, wired in alongside the floppy ears and curly tails, not learned separately by each individual dog. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. You didn't build that connection. Your ancestors barely tried to. A behavioral quirk, tolerance instead of fear, spread through a wild population over thousands of years, dragging physical changes and entirely new cognitive abilities along with it. And the end result was an animal engineered by accident to understand you better than almost any other species on the planet. Ancient humans didn't set out to create dogs the way you might design a tool or shape a spear. Nobody had blueprints. Nobody had a goal. What they had was a fire, some scraps of food, and an unintentional filter that let only the calmest wolves survive close by. Generation after generation, that filter did the work. It shaped skulls, softened fear responses, curled tails, and eventually produced an animal capable of looking into your eyes and reading your intentions in a way even its wild ancestors never could. Think about what that means the next time your dog tilts its head at you or looks toward your hand when you point at something across the room. You are not just watching a pet respond to training. You are watching the tail end of an evolutionary chain reaction that began with a single question no one ever consciously asked. Which wolf is brave enough to sit near the fire tonight? That question answered itself over and over for tens of thousands of years, one calm wolf at a time, until it built a creature soft enough, curious enough, and tuned closely enough to human behavior to become your closest companion. You didn't domesticate the wolf. The bravest, calmest wolves domesticated themselves and simply let you believe you were in charge the whole time. Tonight, when your dog curls up beside you and watches your face for a cue, remember what you're really looking at. It isn't obedience, it is the final result of an accident that started at the edge of a fire thousands of years before anyone thought to call it love. But the story doesn't end with one campfire or one continent. Genetic studies now suggest dog domestication may have happened more than once, in more than one place, among more than one group of wolves. Some researchers point to East Asia. Others point to the Middle East or Europe. The truth may be messier than a single origin story. Different wolf populations in different corners of the world may have run the same accidental experiment independently, each time arriving at a strikingly similar result: calmer eyes, softer bodies, a creature willing to sit by the fire instead of howling at it from a distance. Look closer at the DNA itself and the story gets even stranger. Scientists have found specific genetic changes in dogs tied to the same hormone systems involved in human bonding, including oxytocin, the chemical linked to trust and attachment. When a dog stares into your eyes, its oxytocin levels rise. Yours do too. That experiment never stopped running. It simply spread. As humans migrated across continents, dogs went with them, into deserts, across ice, onto boats crossing open water. Wherever people went, a version of this same calm, curious wolf descendant followed close behind. Today, there are more breeds of dog than any other domesticated animal on Earth, from creatures small enough to fit in your palm to ones large enough to pull a sled through snow. Every single one of them traces back to that same original filter. Which wolf could sit near the fire without fear? You can still see traces of the wild animal underneath if you know where to look. A dog turning in a circle before lying down, an old instinct from flattening grass into a nest. A dog burying a bone, an old instinct from hiding food a wolf couldn't finish. A dog howling at a siren, an old instinct from calling out across a distance no voice could otherwise cross. None of that behavior was trained into your dog. It was inherited, passed down from an animal that once slept in the open, long before anyone thought to build it a bed. Modern science keeps finding new layers to this old story. Some dogs today are trained to detect disease in the human body, cancers and seizures and blood sugar crashes, sometimes minutes before medical equipment can confirm it. Researchers studying this ability believe it comes from the same nose that once tracked prey across a frozen landscape, now redirected toward keeping a single human being alive. The same animal shaped by an Ice Age campfire is now standing beside hospital beds. Nobody designed that outcome either. It emerged from the same ancient bond, aimed at a new kind of survival. Even your dog's face may be built to hold your attention. Researchers studying canine facial muscles found that dogs have a specific muscle around the eyes, one that produces an expression strikingly similar to human sadness, and that this muscle is far less developed in wolves. Some scientists believe this expression evolved because it worked. Humans respond to it, care for it, feed it. A wolf never needed sad eyes to survive in the wild. A dog living beside humans did. Your dog's face may be, quite literally, evolved to make you fall for it. So when you look at your dog tonight, understand what you are actually looking at. Not a finished product, not a static gift handed down from the past. A living, ongoing experiment, still running, still shaped one generation at a time by the same simple rule that started it all beside a fire 30,000 years ago. You feed a stray outside your door. It doesn't run. It sits, it watches you with eyes built, quite literally, to make you believe you're the one in control. You think you're being kind, but the real answer is far stranger. You are simply the latest human being trusted enough to keep the experiment going.